horses during COVID. So every once in a while, a giant train goes by. So I may have to mute when a train or maybe a horse gallops in the past.
Wow. So, I mean, first of all, Sarah, this is, I'm biased, but this is a huge honor. I've had the privilege of reading this book, and it is, there are so many words that spring to mind. It's lyrical. It's so fluent. But it's brave. It's so courageous, and I can't wait for more people to read it. I've obviously been reading your work for many years, I think since sort of the mid 2000s, and this is, you've written a lot of extraordinary things, but this is really special. What's so incredible about it is that, what's so incredible, before I sort of I'll embarrass you just a few more seconds. What's so incredible about this book is that you've investigated the lives of so many other people for so long. And people might well say, yeah, you're always putting the camera on me. But I'm not sure that any investigative journalist has really turned the camera on themselves with greater rigor than you've done here. Maybe the same rigor, but not greater rigor. Like, you really go in. And I think that this, at a point in time in society where it's so much about having barriers up, you take down all the barriers, and that's incredibly powerful. But without further ado, I mean, we'll get into questions later, but I thought the best thing would be just to hear from you, really. Yeah, go for it.
So Musa is an incredible, renowned writer about sport and racial justice in sport specifically, but also environmental justice and a tremendous amount of different topics, as well as being basically good at every single job there is to do in the world, which is kind of astounding. You're not like a Renaissance man, like you're like 4 Renaissance men. But what Musa is his chief accomplishments in life is yelling at me to write this book, which I was having a really rough time at the New York Times. I was doing this thankless job called Night Rewrite, where you basically wait for people to die and bad things to happen to people, and then you call them on their worst day. And I was listless. I mean, I was on Facebook most of the time until people died or a hurricane swept through. And I said to Musa, I'm just not using myself. And he said, well, write a book, write about something. And I said, well, the only thing I care about aside from journalism is horses. And I said, but I never want to reveal that side about myself because it's a privileged, rarefied world. And I thought I wouldn't be taken seriously as a journalist who covers these incredibly hard scrabble corners of the earth if I revealed I'm actually secretly a pony girl. And Musa said to me the immortal words. I was actually driving on my way to the barn where I talk to him every week. And he said, Sarah, it's passion. This is your passion, and passion resonates. That's all that people care. That passion resonates, whatever it is. And that night I went and pitched the book, and the next morning they bought it. So Musa, this book is dedicated to you, and thank you for being an inspiration. But it's also dedicated to a lot of different equestrians I've met, one of who is on the line, Larry Callis, who is a star of this book, and just a star in general. So I'm going to read a little bit from it, probably about 6-7 minutes. I figured I would read because nobody's read the book yet because it's only came out yesterday, so I'll give you a little. So I was bicycling alongside the Harlem River when I was about 20, and I had been working for a political candidate, and he just tanked, and I was having an existential crisis. My grandma had just died, and I'm going on this bike, pretending I'm galloping on a horse, because that's what I do whenever I'm at speed. And I thought I saw a mirage in the middle of the Harlem River, a riding arena and a farm. And so I biked across, and lo and behold, it was a stables in the middle of Harlem. And the proprietors were Dr. George, don't call him by his first name, Dr. George Blair and Mrs. Blair, Ann Blair. And Mrs. Blair, that minute I got on that island, put a pitchfork in my hand and said, can you pick a stall? Can you clean up this horse shit? And I did, and I got a job with them. So this is, that prefigures what I'm about to read to you. Dr. Blair, and they were African-American. Dr. Blair started the New York City Black World Championship Rodeo in 1984, an extravaganza of bull riding, calf roping, and bronc busting. The festival pitched up on the pavement each year on Lenox Avenue at 145th Street in Harlem. It had its own official day of the year, proclaimed annually by the mayor. John Wayne is the epitome of the Western cowboy. By the way, Dr. Blair only growls, so I'm going to say it in my voice, but imagine Dr. Blair, John Wayne is the epitome of the Western cowboy. And there was no clue that Afro-Americans were even cowboys, that they're part of the American culture, Dr. Blair told me during a chat in 2019. He was 88 years old and recovering from a broken femur, sustained when a horse acted up as he loaded it on the trailer. He was healing up for still another summer on the island in Harlem at his farm. That's why I started the rodeo, he said. Because the black cowboys were erased, Dr. Blair? He snorted. They haven't been erased because they were never included. By the time I started working for the Blairs, the rodeo had wound down, and all that was left was their tiny riding school on Randall's Island on land they leased from the city. It was dedicated to educating poor urban youth about horses, cowboys, and their place in American history. But when I started the job, I didn't know about the riding school's mission, or the by then defunct pioneering all-black rodeo Dr. Blair had founded, or why. I thought it was just a pony camp run by two lovable, ornery old folk. Dr. Blair, I said one afternoon as I doused Brownie, his horse, with a garden hose beside his permanent folding chair throne on the ranch. He looked at me with bright eyes from under the brim of his white Stetson. I had never addressed him directly in the months that I worked there, following instead the head down and do chores strategy of his wife. He put down his newspaper and bored his eyes more deeply into me as a response. I had wanted to ask him something since that first class, where we showed 40 inner-city children the horse, but never let them ride. I had held my tongue all summer ever since that initial group of children filed back on the bus. They were deliriously happy, of course, but they'd gotten no closer to riding a horse than to stroke Brownie's nose as she nuzzled their sea of outstretched hands, like she was a pop star high-fiving fans in the front row. I struggled with how to phrase my question. I wanted to ask, why don't we teach riding here at a place called New York City Riding Academy? Every session I was washed with extreme guilt, a well-off white woman prancing on horseback before a sea of mostly impoverished majority black children. I was plagued by the feeling that as I demonstrated how to ask a horse to back up, to trot and to canter, what I was really demonstrating was my privilege. Dr. Blair, I finally said, what's the point of our classes? I frightened myself with my bluntness. Sarah, he said, do you know what a cowboy is? The hat was off, and he raked his hands through what remained of his white curls. I thought I did. Doesn't everyone? So deeply entrenched in the American psyche is a cowboy that at first I thought it was a rhetorical question. He stood up from the folding chair. A cowboy is a black man. The cowboy kicked his shaggy bay gelding into high gear. It was a cold day just before New Year's Eve 2018, and it was far from that little island and that old memory in Harlem, in a pocket of Texas called Rosenberg. I was inside a ramshackle barn in a half-covered riding ring. Around us were a dozen black-mouthed curs, cow dogs, and they bayed at the sight of the man next to me on his horse. They knew a cowboy when they saw one, and they keened their wish to be out with him, punching cattle. Larry Callis, the cowboy, was exercising the big bay he was riding before an audience of the dogs and a pen of yearling steer. I watched too alongside the little longhorns as I sat on a chestnut quarter horse named Bud. Callis was in the market for a new ride, and we had driven out to this ranch in the outskirts of Rosenberg to test drive a chunky gelding named Swamper. I'm gonna offer half for this horse, Callis said conspiratorial to me as he rode Swamper alongside Bud, looking to be around to be sure he was out of earshot of the rancher. I leaned out of the saddle and whispered back, so you like him then, even though you can't stop saying how ugly he is in front of the poor thing, I said. You know, Swamper has ears, Larry. I don't like him, Larry said. He pulled off his dark felt cowboy hat. I love him. I could rope any steer in Texas off the back of this here Swamper, but don't you dare breathe a word about it. I'm trying to get him for half price. In his rodeo shirt, Wrangler jeans, spit-shine boots, and black felt Stetson, Callis, a former postman, age 66, groomed Swamper beside me, every inch the cowboy. Quote, but not everyone sees a cowboy when they look at Mr. Callis, my Times article continued. Racism and history's omissions have meant for many he's miscast. Mr. Callis is black. Historians and Hollywood have erased black cowboys from their rightful place among the sunset and sagebrush and the American Western vistas of our mind. 1 in 4 cowboys on the frontier were in fact black, according to historical accounts. Yet their legacy has been whitewashed from Western iconography and American lore by John Wayne and Sergio Leone and written in invisible ink in the pages of the Lone Ranger comic book. I was in Rosenberg that day, searching not for horses, but for the Black Cowboys story. I found it tucked inside a former barbershop at the edge of town. It is a tiny storefront museum that Callis, the postman, has spent his life savings to found, the Black Cowboy Museum. He opened it in 2017, his shrine to cowboys who are enshrined few places else. Until he was an adult, Callis didn't know what role people like him played in this country's story, no conception of the Black Cowboys' legacy, until he was clearing out an old barn and found a photo on its way to the trash from 1880. On it, 8 cowboys were on 8 horses. 7 of the cowboys were Black. Looking into those faces, he saw faces like his own for the first time as part of the narrative of America's invention. In the Black Cowboys' erasure from the story of the West, Callis saw his own family's marginalization from the annals of cowboydom. Callis, I used to go to school and people would kick me if I had a pair of cowboy boots on, Callis told me as we wandered his museum. As a little dude in El Campo, he grew up learning roping from his father at the family's ranch in a still segregated town and country. I had to quit wearing those boots because they would beat me up. Whites would beat me, told me these boots were not my own. Blacks would beat me, told me I was a Black guy who wanted to be white. Callis' voice crackled. This is who I am. I was always going to be a cowboy. If God made me white, I was going to be a cowboy. But God made me Black, and I am a Black cowboy. The poet Langston Hughes wrote in 1942 in his poem Merry-Go-Round, "Where is the Jim Crow section on this merry-go-round, mister? 'Cause I want to ride. On the bus, we're put in the back, but there ain't no back to a merry-go-round. Where's a horse for a kid that is Black?" I didn't want those cowboys to have lived in vain, Callis said to me, pointing to that old antique photo of the 7 Black men who had started it all. He swung out his arm to take in the family albums that filled the museum walls of cowboys he loved, kept out of rodeo arenas and halls of fame in which he believed they belonged. As more people heard about his mission, they came to him with saddles and spurs, etchings and daguerreotypes of Black cowboys to donate to his collection. This is why I opened this museum, he told me. Black cowboys meant something, and they meant something to me. There, on that chilly December day in Texas, I recalled that hot August afternoon in New York City more than a decade back with Dr. Blair. The day he taught me about Black cowboys. The day I stood holding Brownie and asked Dr. Blair why we didn't teach riding to the children who came to see us on the little island between Harlem and Queens. Why we taught only history instead. These children need to know there are other lives to live. Other lives than the ones they know. The ones that seem to them inevitable. Stretched out before them in the housing projects and in the streets, Dr. Blair said to me. These children need to know they are part of this country's story. As the cars swished by along the FDR Drive, their sound swept across the water in time to Brownie's tale. I'm not teaching them to ride, Dr. Blair said. I'm teaching them to dream. I love Dr. Blair and Larry.
Wow. Okay. First of all, wow.
That is beautiful.
Amazing.
Thank
You make me cry.
That's Larry you're hearing. Larry, I made you cry?
Yeah. That was beautiful. Thanks.
You're beautiful.
Thanks for getting this story out. I appreciate it a lot.
You got it out first. But we'll call on you in a minute and ask you some questions about your museum.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you, Larry. Thank you, Sarah. We talk a lot about Black Lives Matter, and part of that is that Black dreams matter. And I'm really glad that you started with that piece. It's fun, and it's really, I love that you started with that, because Dr. Blair is creating opportunity for so many people, and I've never met anyone who's created so much opportunity for themselves and for others as you, as a professional. Like, you are someone who really has gone out and made everything happen in your career. And what's really striking about your writing and your work and your book is just how many different jobs you've done, how hard you've pushed on all these different fronts. And I feel like this book is about horses, but it's about you, but it's also about your family. And I kind of want to start in a kind of slightly weird place. I want to start with your dad,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll start. So your father. Like, tell us about your father quickly, if you don't mind.
Sure. So my father is a really recurring character in the book because he's a recurring character in my existence. He was a Holocaust survivor who masqueraded as a Catholic with false baptismal certificates from the ages of 9 to 13. He had many different identities, and so much of my book is about identity, about living between worlds or finding your place. And I think it's so interesting that my dad survived by having the identity of Julian Scribaiwo, Yehuda Nir. Yehuda means big Jew in Hebrew. And my dad survived by having this false identity. And a lot of my compulsion as I unpacked it to engage in this elite, waspy, equestrian world was, I really believe, motivated by passing. You know, I felt that this was a world that belonged to this superior other, you know, these Flaxen, Ashleys, and Charlottes. And here I am, the daughter of an immigrant. Although externally I pass, right? This is all about the stories and baggage we carry with us. And in investigating, I call the book A Reported Look at Obsession, Musa. And really it ended up being a reported look at my own obsession and really pulling it apart. I have to credit my parents being a psychologist and a psychiatrist, my mom and dad, that I know no other setting than deep personal probing, which can suck sometimes. But it definitely helped me report this out and report myself out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, there's an amazing segment when, I think it's page 98. I was going through because at some point when I was reading this book, I was like, there are so many phrases that pop out that I've got to record them because there's so much great stuff. And page 98, you say, you win an award, and it says here, to my father, our horse, our Hampton's horse, was proof the Nazis had lost. So this is a bit earlier, but this point was proof the Nazis had lost. Could you unpack that phrase, if you don't mind?
Sure. So I joke, you know, that all these horse girls are going to buy this book and be like, why is there so much Holocaust in this book about horses? But that's because, you know, braided through my life are the two narratives. And I even refer to it in the book about my self-consciousness, about, you know, in intermingled paragraphs about ponies and Nazis, you know. And my dad really set me straight. He said to me, and I quote him saying this, never envy me my wounds. You know, I envy that you were spared yours. Because in some ways, when you have a father who lives through a mortal trauma, you can't feel like a real person by comparison, you know, with your cushy life and your access to really the splendor of life, or even just a roof over your head. But this anecdote that you're referring to, so when I was 17, I competed in the most prestigious horse show there is, actually might have been 16, called the Hampton Classic. And it went phenomenally, but I had no conception that I had done so well because my internal narrative was as an also ran. And so I put my horse away and went to get funnel cake, right? There's a great book called like, I'm Just Here for the Cake or something by a humor writer. And that's what I thought, I was just here for the cake. But my dad waited by the side of the arena for the whole day, you know, his bald head crisping in the sun. And when they called the winners, I had won second place out of the top riders in the country. And they all strode into the winner's circle on their magnificent beasts. And there walked my dad into the horsey parade. And he took that red ribbon and he put it on his chest. And as he walked out, he said to the judge, I defeated Hitler. And that's how deeply intermingled and intertwined this sport and this passion is for me with my family narrative.
I mean, it's really incredible that you sought solace in horses, because your father, I mean, he plays multiple roles. In your life, he almost has different roles. He's a dad twice over. He's the kind of dad that your siblings and your brothers knew. He was a different dad to you, wasn't he? You sort of said there's almost two phases of his life as a parent.
Absolutely. My brother said, oh, Dad didn't become Mr. Holocaust till he had you because he wrote this book. And I can't imagine a father where the primacy of the narrative of having survived Hitler was not part of his identity. We have a joke in our family that you can't get up from a meal without mentioning the Holocaust. So sometimes when we get to dessert, someone will go, Holocaust, and then we can leave, you know, and that, looking back, that's a pretty dark joke. It's not even funny.
It's coping though, it's coping, isn't it? That's how we have similar things in my family. Well, we come from a region which has been torn by various things. I won't bore you with that.
When you're from Uganda, you have your own Holocaust.
Yeah, sadly. But I want to talk about your bond with horses, because they are like, this book feels very cinematic. Like having Larry in there is funny. Like when I read this book, I didn't read it, I saw it. If that makes sense. There were so many scenes and I thought to myself, hint, hint, Netflix, if you're on this call, Netflix, adapt this. There's one amazing scene in this book, very cinematic, where you're on a plane and the plane sort of is about to come into land and these horses are terrified and you comfort them. And there's a moment when they kind of like crane towards you, and this is a beautiful bit when you say, it was a moment I will never forget when 3 frightened horses looked at me and called me tribe. Tell me about that moment, please.
Sure. So the way the book is structured, I don't have to tell you, is that every event in my life that involved horses, I tried to pull the thread of it. And I tried to see where it came from and where it went. So I have a Dutch warm blood that I'm obsessed with. His name is Trendsetter. And I thought to myself, how did this Dutch horse in America? Like, what is the process that I have this thing that I don't really think about except for to love it? What's the process of a Dutch horse being imported? So I ended up flying in the cargo hold of a 747 from Holland with 9 Dutch warm bloods being imported. And actually, it's really amazing. You aren't seatbelted in when you take off and land, because you have to be, the horse is not seatbelt, but safety belt. Because they can't understand why their equilibrium is changing. Turbulence kind of bugs them out. And so I'm in this raw belly of a 747 with these horses. And what's so interesting about riding, and I think I'm a little different than a lot of people think about this. A lot of horse people think this is a dance with a partner who enjoys this in the same way that you do. And I think that's wishful thinking. You know, a horse performs under compulsion. You know, Xenophon, the ancient Greek horse whisperer from 350 BCE, said, what a horse does under compulsion is ugly, but what it does with its desire is beautiful. And yes, you can make a horse desire to work for you. And that's really the apex of the sport. But I think that this idea that they're in cahoots with us is wishful thinking. You know, they are in a lot of ways not a servant, but it's a symbiosis and perhaps even parasitic riding. I compel them to my will. But that moment in the plane when the landing gear came out and I'm here playing, cocktail trolley to these horses, bringing them water and hay for 6 hours, and they didn't know what was happening to them. And the 3 of them in this shipping cube turned to me and put their heads in my chest the way a foal does under the teat of a dam, to make the world go away. And that was a moment when they saw me as a member of their herd. And that's when I realized that is the apex of the relationship with horses that it can be. And that's what you should aspire to, that they all held me and I held them and we were a herd. And it was amazing.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And you talk about your connection with horses. And there's one chapter in particular where you explore that sort of symbiosis or the kinship with horses really powerfully. In particular, it's called Benediction. And you talk about this sort of quite harrowing moment when a man breaks into your flat and attacks you and ends up, well, I'll let you tell it, but when you crafted that chapter, when you wrote that chapter, technically the whole book is written beautifully, but that is one of the kind of particular peaks. What inspired you to write and tell the story that way?
So it's really interesting, and I don't think I've told you this, Musa. I didn't have my attack, which in 2010 on Thanksgiving Day, a man climbed in my window to rob me and stabbed me with a box cutter. I survived. He ended up in jail, but it was certainly unraveled my life for a year. but I didn't have it in the story. And I had this interview with the legendary horse whisperer, Monty Roberts, about the flight behavior of horses. And that's what we were trying to say. And he has a philosophy where he says, the only important part of the human-horse dynamic is that the human is a safe place to be. He said the language of horses is exclusively focused on where is a safe place to be. That's their whole sum total of their language. And so we talked about this, and I had omitted it from the book, my own moment when the world wasn't a safe place to be. And I sent the book off, and it started to get bound, and I had this moment where I thought, you want to pretend, Sarah, that this didn't happen to you. Because that's how you make the world a safe place to be, where it's a world where that doesn't happen to you. And that's why I had omitted this story. So I spent the weekend just dashing off that addition to essentially a story that was already there, right? I had already had the space for that story because of Monty Roberts talking about predator and prey. I knew, I almost subconsciously had created a space, and then I included that story. But it's amazing how the subconscious works. My safe place to be is a world where that didn't happen. So my book initially was a world where that didn't happen.
Incredible. I mean, there's every sign with this book that you dug very deep for the story. And there's things in, I've known you for a long time, but there's stories here that I didn't, for example, page 195, there's a story here that I didn't know about. Grandma Frida had died that year of pneumonia, but really from time. I had sat up with her watching Jeopardy and eating coffee ice cream until the evening she passed. The next day, I decided to add her last name, Maslin, to my byline to have her near me forever. Mm-hmm. So every time your name is there on every banner and every byline, that's because you're trying to pay tribute to your grandma Frida.
Yeah. I mean, she wasn't part of my name in an official way. Like, look, even my little thing says Sarah Nir. That's my real name. But I elevated her name to include her. Yeah, because, you know, much like the horses, she shaped my life. It's interesting because I'm not biologically related to my grandmother. And I never realized that till as I say in the book, I grew 5'8" and my grandma came up to my navel. And I was like, Grandma, like, I'm huge. All our cousins are navel high. And she said, thank God you're not a shrimp. Shrimp aren't kosher. You know, and I think that my grandma, much like the horses, was a model of family by choice, right?
Yeah.
That and again, back to Roberts, people who are a safe place to be, animals that are a safe place to be, are your home, and so paying tribute to my grandma was essential in my everyday life.
And you talk a lot, I mean, of your grandma, your aunt, over in Israel, 103 years old. I mean, incredible. But you also talk about, you know, the really intimate stuff. And there's one particular phrase that just really leapt out. Horses became my siblings when I had 3, but none at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, if you could unpack that at all.
Sure.
I mean, it's such a powerful.
You know, I come from a blended family, and I have a tremendous amount of years between me and my brothers. But it wasn't the years that separated us that I realized. It was that I, in their minds, replaced them, or I had the family that they were owed. And so I have never had a relationship with them. I have no friendship with them. And I say in the book, having brothers you don't have is more painful than having no brothers. And it really sort of set the tone of the project of my life was to appeal to men who didn't want me, because the first men I ever knew were men who didn't want me. And I relate that to having this very abusive riding trainer for 8 years, whose every word I listened to, who's the son of a legendary trainer. And the truth is their practices are malpractice. That's how they make horses jump so high. And I participated in it really because of this almost ineluctable compulsion to try to appeal to these men. And I had this moment where I realized I was driving back from the barn, and I thought to myself, I didn't make my brothers not love me. and there were no amount of riding ribbons I could win and trophies I could win that would make them or this trainer, Andre Dallaire, love me. And the story was written before I was born, and I released myself of all four men that day. And horses helped me do that because I had this built-in community of creatures that would love me and be there for me as a model of what love should look like. And this stuff was hard to write. I mean, my mom is on this call, and we've had many discussions about exposing this painful component of my relationship with my family. But, you know, as a journalist, I have two things. My job description is why, and my job product is truth. And that's all I can deliver. That's all I'm capable of delivering. And anything sugar-coated, readers would see through. Musa, should we take questions? Because we have 20 minutes. What do you want to do?
Yeah, questions are great. Absolutely. Let's go for it.
We'll talk about Black Cowboys and get Larry to say a little something.
Let's get into questions. Why don't we? Well, it's funny because Leah, your trainer,
my riding instructor, Leah,
riding
here.
instructor.
And also I should shout out Tom Chambers, who is the photographer of the extraordinary cover art, is also here. So thank you so much for this beautiful art, Tom. And that's Leah. Thank you for teaching me how to ride.
Well, it's funny because Leah has a question which sort of dovetails with something I was going to ask. Now, what's interesting is throughout the book, horses bring out your most lyrical prose, your best prose. So I'll just quickly read this segment and then ask Leah's question to you.
Sure.
So there's this amazing phrase where you say, their tattered tails were no longer fly whisks, but heraldic banners streaming their glory behind them. And horses bring out a side to your playfulness, of freedom that is so powerful. And Leah asks this question I want to put to you. Sarah, talk a little bit about the physical feeling of riding, the energy like the river between the riverbanks, and the relationship between that physical feeling and emotion. You say it so well in the book. So please tell us about that.
Leah. Actually, Leah was sort of one of the guiding people to make me think this. You know, after a lifetime of riding with animal abusers, I found somebody who respects animals and humans. So Leah has really elevated my understanding of riding. And one thing she often says is that you're sculpting the almost kinetic potential energy of the animal underneath you, and you are being the walls of a riverbank. So you're not, imagine, you can't grab water, you can't wrestle water to do what you want it to do, but you can guide it, and you can be that steady force. With horseback riding, you know, I'm really go back to that idea that it's a conversation between a human and an animal that for millennia has been bred to be a complement to mankind. And it's a dialogue. And one of the really interesting things, actually, this was a biographer of Trump came up with this, and Michael Barbaro, who does the Daily, called me. He was like, I just had this crazy conversation that made me think of you. Because this Trump biographer said he's gotten into riding because he's so type A, it's the only time his mind shuts off. And the gentleman believes his mind shuts off because that sway of the horse replicates the essential rhythm of being in the womb. So for the first 9 months of our lives, we're being rocked within amniotic fluid. And the only time you're rocked as an adult is on a horse. I mean, when was the last time anyone rocked any of us, right?
Yeah.
But as a type A person, my mind stills when I'm atop a horse. And there's a lot of interesting theories about that. But I say in the book, you know, Musa, horses lend themselves to poetry. You look at a dog or a cat, you know, I got a cute dog sitting in my foot here. It's cute, it's charming, but a horse induces an emotion. And there are few other creatures. A horse is like an ocean vista or a grand mountain. You know, you feel that feeling when you look at a horse. And there are few things in this world that do that to you. Few living creatures, certainly. Maybe a really hot guy.
Yes, well, there's a couple of those on this call, actually, on this chat, but that's another story. No pressure. Actually, while we're talking about the sensation, the physical feeling of riding, I want to talk about the horse theft. Because that, okay, so there's many cinematic scenes in the book, but one of the most cinematic is when by night you steal horses. Tell us about that.
I stole a horse. I don't regret it. I was entering a phase in my life where I was briefly very bad, and I went clubbing, and I was a wreck in New York City. I was, sorry, Mom, you're on the call. I was sneaking out at night, and I would have my stilettos in my hand so I wouldn't click on the, hallway, and I would scoot out the door and party. And then I found out you can't ride hungover, not if you want to win. And I had a really poor showing, and my trainer said to me, after I went backwards 3 times in 3 different show jumping courses, he said, if you do that again, I'll tell your mom what you did last night. And I had never told him what I had done, but he knew my riding told him. So I immediately sobered up. He pulled me back from the cliff, and I had to find a new way to be bad. And I worked at this ranch with some real Nebraska cowboys. And one night they called me to the saddle post, and they said, come back at midnight, we're going to steal the horses. And we snuck into the paddocks, and in pitch black, because horses have tremendously powerful eyesight, and even if they didn't, we were too reckless to care. We picked those horses out of the field while they were sleeping, saddled them, and blasted off the fastest I've probably ever gone in daylight ×2 through the woods for hours to the beach. And it was one of the most powerfully free moments of my life. And that's what horses do for you, right? On 2 legs, I'm Sarah. On 4, I'm formidable. And horses allow us to access power that we can't reach. And that's the gift they give us. And we never give it back in the same order. I've searched my soul for ways to, but they give us that tremendous gift.
It's funny because not only is that a beautiful sentiment about what they give us and the power of riding a horse, it's also quite political. And the reason I mention that is because there's a segment when you say, and I'll just quote here, piloting huge animals at velocity is extreme, as wild as rock climbing or motocross, as likely as treacherous. Sexism is the only reason I believe that riding isn't considered similarly badass. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's get into that. Like what made you frame it that way? What made you think of that aspect?
Because I've broken my spine so many times. I mean, if I were to show you, right now I'm sitting on a pillow because I have a screwed up back that will plague me the rest of my life. I have electrical pain through my body the entire time I'm on this planet. And it is from a tremendous amount of injuries because it is natural to this sport to become deeply injured, just as it would be to a rock climber. I used to make cocktails in the Hamptons at a bar when I wasn't riding. During the day, I'd work at a ranch, and in the evening, I'd work at a bar to pay for lessons. And I would make cosmopolitans, and they're pink, right? And these bros would order a beer and something pink for the girl. Meanwhile, she's drinking 3 shots of tequila or whatever it is in the Cosmo. He's drinking a beer, but he's manly, right? And hers is girly because it's pink. She's drinking the tough stuff. And it's really interesting to me what gets tied up and the connotations that get associated with the sport. And I'm going to bring it back to the Black Cowboys, Musa, because 1 in 4 cowboys in the American West were Black. And this wonderful historian, actually a Jewish guy from Lower Manhattan, who became the foremost scholar of the American West, William Loren Katz, who just passed away, he said, Blacks couldn't be part of the narrative of how America was made, because if they came in whip, at the end of a whip and at the end of a chain. And that's not the narrative America wanted to remember. And so these false identities get put on this sport, that it's girly or soft, or that it's elite and all white. Ralph Lauren created the WASP identity of the sport with his cashmere and jodhpurs. And my dad used to say, don't you mean Ralphie Lipschitz? Because that's Ralph Lauren's real name. He's a Jew from Queens. And so I hope in poking this bubble, popping this bubble of this sport, it'll cause us to look more deeply at us and them, at who's the us and who's the them in various aspects of the world.
Well, since we're getting to the us and them, and we've got Larry on the call right now, it seems a shame not to bring him in. Do you want to have a chat with Larry about his experience in
Sure,
putting this
Larry.
together?
I'd love to speak to you if you're still hanging out. So Larry is
Sure.
the founder of the Black Cowboy Museum in Rosenberg, Texas. He's also a country singer before he lost his voice, and he also is a postman, but most importantly is he's a badass rodeo rider and a great human. And I told Larry, he reminds me a lot of my dad, because the two of them fought tremendous adversity to make the world a better place. And the two of them are on the same mission. So Larry, tell us a little bit why you opened that museum. You were angry, huh? You weren't. There was no place for the Black Cowboy.
That's right. I had very good friends I grew up with that didn't get any recognition. So I wanted to give them some recognition. And it was mostly just for this part of the country, for Texas. And with you put me all over the world. But mostly I just wanted to let people know there were Black Cowboys. And they did some important things.
Yeah, and you didn't even know there were Black Cowboys, really, till you saw that photo. You didn't know the part of the American legacy that they were contributing to.
Well, I actually knew, because I knew all my cousins were, and my uncles, and my grandpa, and his grandpa, but I couldn't prove it. And when I saw that picture, I said, I can prove it, because we didn't have pictures. And so I didn't think anyone would believe me.
But you know, that's the scandal, right? That's what makes me so angry, Larry. And I have a lot of rage about injustice as a reporter. I had a very famous reporter, was a professor, Walt Bogdanich, and he said, you can't do investigative reporting unless you're angry. And I said to him, but I'm not angry, I just want to make the world a better place. And then after I started doing my nail salon investigation into exploitative labor practices and abuse, I called Walt and I said, Walt, I'm fucking angry. and it makes me angry that you have to prove who you are. You know, the vicissitudes of history and the cruelty of racism, that you have to prove who you are. You know, that this world, that you have a grandpa and a granddaddy who's a cowboy, why should you have to prove anything? The only thing you should have to do is ride a horse. And it makes me angry, but you make me happy.
Well, I appreciate that. You make me happy.
I appreciate it.
Horses make me happy.
Exactly. So, do we have any more questions from people?
Yeah, don't be shy. Don't be shy, people.
You can unmute yourself too if you want.
And what I'll do, Sarah, while we're waiting for questions to come and while people are being shy, Larry talks about his experience, and horses are so identified with status in America. That's obviously why they didn't allow Black Cowboys to be identified with horses. There's a segment, and what I love about your book is your book it zooms in to kind of molecular level emotionally, then it zooms out at the bigger picture. And there's one segment you say, in 2000, this is in relation to horse and class and how horses are signified of class. In 2018, a 21-year-old farmer called Pradeep Rathod was murdered in Gujarat state in Western India for daring to own a horse. Tell me about horses and status in different African societies.
Yes, so I ended up doing a big exploration into horses in India, mostly because I became obsessed with the horse that's on the cover, which is an Indian Marwari horse. And they're super beautiful, but they have curlicue ears and they look like cartoons, and I needed one. So I tried to figure out how to get one, and I won't reveal the secret about them, but it involves semen smuggling and some swashbuckling. So, read the book. But Dalits, the lowest caste in India, are forbidden from caring for horses. And there's this life rite called Bharat, which is a marriage rite. You know, you ride this white horse to your bride. I'm sure people have seen Indian weddings. It's forbidden for Dalits, even though the caste system has been banned since the 50s. And some of them have begun doing it, and under tremendous risk. They are stoned. Some have been killed doing it. And actually, they do it in football gear now, American football gear with helmets and pads, because they get stoned. And when I worked at that ranch where we stole the horses, I was doing some research into its history, because it was the first ranch in America. And I found a flyer from 1930 for it, 5 cents a cowboy cookout, 25 cents a trail ride. And at the bottom of the flyer, it said, "The clientele is reserved for Gentiles only." And here was the same messaging that the Dalits are getting, that the Black Cowboys are getting, that my people, this sport isn't for you. This world isn't for you. And I think this moment that we're having with Black Lives Matter, and more broadly Trans Lives Matter, is that who's to say what world is for you? This world is ours. And I hope in exploring and exploding these things in the book, it allows people to go after what they want. One of my dad's things, to get back to what you started with, my dad, is he would always say, the immortal motto, "Let them say no first before I tell myself no."
Yeah.
And I carry that with me in my journalism and in my life. So many times we say, "Oh, I shouldn't try that because they'll probably say no." And my dad would say, "No, let them say no first before I dare tell myself no." And for me, horses have been a lifelong passion of telling myself yes, and the horses have always said yes back to me.
It's funny because we talk a lot about your parents, and I've had the privilege of meeting them, your dearly departed father, and also your mother, who is an incredible force in so many ways for progressive change. And I think your mother is someone you get so much of your bravery from, in terms of your mum interrogates very fiercely the surrounding conditions of our society. And someone who's really helped your mother and your father, be the people they were, is Beverly. Beverly is an incredible character in this book. So maybe tell us quickly about Beverly, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. We have no questions. I mean, come on, there's got to be some reporters who want to ask a question.
Shy crowd.
Oh, come on, guys, give me one. Let's have one question. Memphis, ask a question. Think up a question.
You have one mother to say that. Your accomplishment is legion, but the real accomplishment is not what you do, but who you are.
Okay. Mute.
That's true. No.
Anyway, so Beverly.
Wow, your mum looks amazing. Look at your mum. Wow, my goodness.
Okay, mute. But thanks, Mom. No, so really interestingly, Beverly was my nanny for. She worked for family for 29 years, and when my dad took ill and became incapacitated and essentially vegetative, she became his caretaker, and so this sort of circle of care was really profoundly affecting. But what's really interesting is that I actually got a review on Goodreads today. Someone gave it 5 stars, and then but they wrote in it. They wrote in the review, Sarah Nir comes across as a rich, privileged girl, and I was like, because I am. That's what I wrote the book about, having immense privilege, and what do you do with it, and what how do you parse it, and how do you make good on it? And really interestingly is that Beverly was this backbone of my family that allowed my mother to succeed, and in doing so she allowed Beverly to succeed. Beverly has 6 children. She started when she was 17 having children, and every single one of them now has a secondary degree, and it's this really interesting symbiotic relationship between our 2 families, that she enabled my mom to provide this life for me by allowing my mom to climb the professional ladder and provide this life, and including horses. And in turn, my mom was the ladder that Beverly climbed to the American dream. And I say in the book that watching Beverly achieve her American dream was the first time I understood that the power in people's personal stories. And it was the first time I wanted to tell those, because I want to be Beverly. I aspire to be her. And those are the types of stories I try to tell in my journalism. She was a tremendous guiding force in my life. And if I'd say the most important people I learned from were Beverly and Guernsey the horse. We have a question.
Oh my God. Okay, this question is from the great Daphne Steinberg. Daphne is amazing, so I'm glad she's come in. So let me just read this out. First of all, Daphne, thank you for joining us. I love your art. Daphne is a wonderful artist for those who haven't checked out her work yet. You touched a bit on this, Sarah, but if you don't mind expanding, how was writing this book different from your journalistic experience? Was it easier or more difficult to put yourself into the story?
I think that's a great question, and it's a great question to end on because we've reached 8 o'clock. I do want to say before I answer this question, it is very frustrating what's happening to the Amazonification of book sales, and McNally Jackson was kind enough to have this event for us. So I really hope that you purchase a book through McNally Jackson and support a local business. So many people come to these and then they go buy it on Amazon, but buy it at McNally. It's a New York fixture. Daphne, I'll answer you in that as a reporter, I am disinclined is not the right word. I am forbidden from using the word I. I am forbidden from writing about myself, my opinions, my feelings. And when I pitched this book to my editor, Sean Manning, who is here, thank you, Sean, I said, this isn't the story about me. This is the story the horses have told me throughout my life and that I found around the world. And Sean's one pushback was, no, it's your story. And that pushed me to make this much more memoiristic because I realized that the two were entangled. But that was very hard for me. I hope when you read the book, you'll have an insight into my family and my upbringing. But you know, a reporter is supposed to be a mirror to the world. And this time I asked people to step through the mirror with me. And that was emotionally rough. I could write all day long about the digestive habits of horses and how their saliva breaks down hay, but when I have to write about how it makes me feel, that was a challenge.
Wow, that's a wonderful ending. I feel like that ties the bow quite nicely, and I know you've been with us for an hour. What more can I say, Sarah? This conversation has been a privilege. Knowing you is a privilege. Being able to read this before it gets out in the world fully is a privilege. I think people are going to love it, and I think that it's going to make them see the world you inhabit differently, the world they inhabit differently, which is the greatest compliment, I think. I've always said that confession inspires confession, and this book is utterly confessional. It's about family, memory, horses, exclusion, inclusion, all of it. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. But thank you, Sarah, for being you and for expressing you. Thank you.
Thank you. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you for being the inspiration for this book.
And on behalf of McNally Jackson, thanks to you both. And thank you to Larry. And thank you to the rest of the audience. This was great.
Bye.
All good. We're off. Take care, everyone. See you soon.